In November of 1988, police in Sacramento, California, dug up a backyard garden and found 7 human bodies buried beneath the roses. The woman who lived there was 59 years old. She wore oversized glasses, favored floral house dresses, and spoke in the kind of soft, grandmotherly voice that made people trust her instantly. Her name was Dorothea Puente, and by the time investigators were done, they believed she had killed at least 9 people. Here's the crazy part. Nobody suspected her, not for years. Social workers were literally sending vulnerable people to live in her house because as far as anyone knew, Dorothea Puente was one of the good ones. A woman who took in the homeless, the addicted, and the elderly nobody else wanted to deal with and gave them a place to sleep. Turns out that reputation was the whole scheme. This is the story of how a convicted felon rebuilt herself as a beloved caretaker, how she got away with murder for 6 straight years, and how one missing man with no family left to miss him almost let her get away with it forever. Before any of this happened, Dorothea Puente was already a criminal. Long before the bodies, long before the boarding house, she had a documented history of forgery and fraud. She'd been arrested multiple times, and she'd served time. If you'd looked at her file in the 1970s, you would have seen a woman who preyed on people for money over and over with no signs of stopping. Here's what should have been impossible. None of that stopped her from being trusted with the most vulnerable people in an entire city. Her real name was Dorothea Helen Gray, born in Redlands, California, back in 1929. Her early life was rough, marked by poverty and instability, a childhood that gave her plenty of reasons to become someone else entirely, and she did, over and over. She married and divorced multiple times. One marriage lasted 14 years despite constant fighting over her drinking and gambling. Another ended after just 16 months. One husband left her after a single week. By the time she reached her 50s, Dorothea Puente had reinvented her identity so many times that almost nobody around her actually knew who she used to be. And that, it turns out, was exactly the point. By the early 1980s, Puente had reinvented herself again. She rented a Victorian duplex on F Street in downtown Sacramento and opened it up as a boarding house. On paper, it looked like charity work. She took in alcoholics trying to get sober, people with disabilities, and elderly pensioners with nowhere else to go. She helped them set up their Social Security accounts, cooked for them, and looked after them. Hold on to that detail about the Social Security accounts, because it matters more than you think. In April of 1982, a woman named Ruth Monroe, Puente's friend and business partner, moved into one of her properties. Shortly after, Monroe died from an overdose of codeine and Tylenol. When police asked Puente about it, she had an explanation ready. Monroe was depressed, she said, because her husband was sick. Investigators believed her, and they ruled it a suicide and moved on with their lives. Nobody realized they'd just met a serial killer for the first time. Over the next 6 years, this pattern would repeat itself again and again. A vulnerable tenant moves into the F Street house, and sometime later, they're gone. And every single time, Dorothea Puente has an answer ready. They moved away. They went to visit family. They wandered off on their own. Leona Carpenter, Alvaro Montoya, Dorothy Miller, Benjamin Fink, James Gallup, Vera Faye Martin, Betty Palmer. One after another, these were real people, elderly or disabled, isolated from family. Exactly the kind of people whose disappearance wouldn't set off alarm bells. And one after another, they vanished from that house. Think about who these people actually were for a second. Not statistics, not victims in a file somewhere, but real men and women who had already been let down by the system once, who ended up on F Street precisely because nobody else had room for them. Puente didn't choose her victims randomly. She chose people who were already invisible to everyone else, which meant nobody was going to come looking. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. Their Social Security checks kept showing up, and Dorothea Puente kept cashing every single one. Think about that for a second. She wasn't just killing people, she was running a business model on top of their deaths. Keep the checks coming, keep the story believable, keep smiling at the mailman. For years, it worked perfectly, and it wasn't just her tenants. In 1985, right after she was released from prison for an earlier fraud conviction, Puente's boyfriend, a 77-year-old man named Everson Gilmouth, picked her up from prison in his truck. Not long after that, he disappeared too. Months later, in January of 1986, a fisherman on the Sacramento River found something horrifying: a large wooden box floating in the water. Inside was a decomposing body. It would take investigators years to figure out who it was. By the time they identified him as Everson Gilmouth, Dorothea Puente had been running her boarding house undisturbed the entire time. Nobody connected the man in the river to the sweet grandmother on F Street. Not yet. That's when things finally started to unravel. In November of 1988, a social worker reported one of Puente's tenants missing. His name was Alvaro Montoya, a man in his 50s with intellectual disabilities. And unlike so many people who passed through that house, somebody was actually looking for him. Sacramento police sent a detective named John Cabrera to check it out. And here's the thing, Puente didn't panic. She invited him in, answered his questions, and was warm, cooperative, and completely convincing. If you'd walked in on that conversation, you would have believed every word she said. But Cabrera noticed something in the backyard, a patch of dirt that looked freshly disturbed, and that one detail was about to blow the entire case wide open. Police started digging. What they found stopped the city cold. Body after body, buried in shallow graves. Right beneath the roses and garden statues Dorothea Puente had spent years carefully maintaining. 7 bodies came out of that yard. Combined with Gilmouth's remains from the river and Ruth Monroe's death years earlier, investigators now believed Puente was connected to 9 deaths total. Here's the part that still gets people. While detectives were literally excavating bodies from her backyard, Dorothea Puente asked if she could step outside for a cigarette, and nobody stopped her. She walked away from her own crime scene, got on a bus, and disappeared. For days, Puente was the subject of a manhunt that gripped Northern California. Reporters were calling her the killer landlady, and police had no idea where she'd gone. Turns out, she hadn't stopped either. She'd fled to Los Angeles, checked into a motel under a different name, and, almost unbelievably, had already started targeting a new potential victim, an elderly man she met at a nearby bar. But her luck finally ran out. The man recognized her face from news broadcasts covering the Sacramento excavation, and he called the police. Dorothea Puente, the woman who had evaded suspicion for 6 years, was arrested in a Los Angeles motel and brought back to Sacramento to face what she'd done. The trial that followed was long, complicated, and in some ways deeply unsatisfying. Puente was charged with 9 counts of murder. Preliminary hearings started in 1990, and the trial itself dragged on for years before finally reaching a verdict in 1993. Here's the twist that frustrated a lot of people who followed the case. Puente's defense didn't deny the fraud. They admitted it. Yes, she cashed the checks. Yes, she failed to report the deaths. But her lawyers argued her tenants, elderly and in poor health, had simply died of natural causes, and she'd taken advantage of that afterward instead of causing it. It was a defense built on confessing to one crime to escape conviction for a much worse one. Prosecutors pushed back hard. They argued Puente had sedated her tenants before killing them, then buried the bodies and kept collecting checks for months, sometimes longer, after they were dead. To the prosecution, the pattern was too consistent, too convenient, and too profitable to be a coincidence. 9 people, all vulnerable, all isolated, all dead within the same 6-year window, all under the roof of the same woman. The defense countered that these were elderly, sick people who could have died at any time from any number of natural causes, and that Puente's only real crime was staying quiet and cashing in. For the jury, it came down to a brutal question. Was this negligence and fraud dressed up as tragedy, or was this murder hiding behind old age and bad health? And here's the part that still divides people today. It partially worked. The jury convicted Dorothea Puente of 3 murders, 2 counts of first-degree murder murder with special circumstances and 1 count of second degree, but on the remaining 6 charges, the jury couldn't agree, and no verdict was ever reached on those 6 deaths. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dorothea Puente maintained her innocence until the very end. She never confessed, not to police, not to reporters, not to anyone. She died on March 27, 2011 at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla at the age of 82, having spent nearly 2 decades in prison for crimes she insisted, right up until her final breath, that she never committed. The house on F Street is still standing today. It's changed hands more than once, and for years, the new owners actually opened it up for public tours, charging a small fee that went to a local center supporting homeless residents in the city, the very population Dorothea Puente once preyed on. There's even a mannequin dressed as her, out on the patio, holding a green shovel, standing watch over the exact spot where detectives once dug up the truth. But here's the question that lingers long after the story ends. Dorothea Puente didn't hide in the shadows, and she didn't lurk. She built an entire persona, warm, devout, and grandmotherly, specifically so she could be trusted with the people society had already stopped paying attention to: the homeless, the disabled, and the isolated elderly with no one checking in. For 6 years, that persona worked exactly the way she designed it to, and it makes you wonder how many other people in how many other cities are trusted every single day with the exact kind of person nobody else is watching. It took one missing man, one detective who noticed a patch of disturbed dirt, and one elderly stranger in a Los Angeles bar who happened to recognize a face from the news to finally bring the whole thing down. If any one of those moments had gone differently, Dorothea Puente might still have been out there, smiling at the mailman, cashing checks that weren't hers to cash. That's the part of this story that never really leaves you. Not the shovel, not the roses, not even the box in the river. It's the fact that the system built to protect the most vulnerable people in Sacramento is exactly what handed them to her, one trusting referral at a time. Somewhere out there, that same gap probably still exists. A version of that boarding house, a version of that quiet trust, waiting for someone else to walk through the door and be forgotten the same way.
Trust is the only lock she ever needed to pick.